Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Menachos daf Lamed Tes. We are going to begin on Lamed Tes Amud Aleph, the first line, the top line. So we just began this new parak of Tcheles, and in this parak about Tcheles, we're learning about the dinim of tzitzis. So Yomi Rabbi, Shema Mino, we can derive that Kesher Elyon Diraisa. That when it comes to the knotting at the very end of the braid, that is a chiyuv d'oraisa. Why? Why would we think that that's the case? That's Rashi Hainu Nami Hahu Kesher. There's different girsas. Shalmata Halach Moshe Sinai Kesher Echa B'tzitzis Mi'oraisa. So even though maybe some of the knots are Halach Moshe Sinai, however, the Kesher Echad B'tzitzis is d'oraisa. Okay, so why would we say that? If in fact it's only din d'Rabbanan, then my itzterech lamishri sedin b'tzitzis. Why would we need to even mention this notion of the isser of having potentially the linen garment and the wool threads pshita? Why would that be an issue? Even though you can say, well, l'chayra, it's an issue of shatness, but we know that hataykif tekifa achas enu chibur. That if a person would pass a needle through a garment, even though let's say there's wool and then there's linen, but it's only one passing by, so then that's not a chibur, as Rashi says. If it's mirabanan, then the tzidin b'tzitzis that says silba shatnes, you can't wear shatnes, but it also says gedilim tasalach that you're allowed to wear wool and linen together, provided that again it's the baged and the tzitzis. What do you mean? Obviously it's mutter because at toikif tekiva, as Rashi says, toifer techiva achas. If let's say you took one passing by of a needle, Eino chibur, that's not enough. Mishum ahi techiva chetoichev hachutin betalos Eino chibur, it's nothing. So therefore, el shema mina d'oraisa, it must be a raya taka that the kesher elyon taka has to be d'oraisa. Okay, let's look at question 5. Maharaya d'midoraisa be'ina lochol pachos kesher achas b'tzitzis. We used to have one knot. So it says the fact that we mater kilayim and tzitzis, without a kshira, it would be no iser kilayim. If it was just a bunch of strings hanging out there, then there would be no iser kilayim. You don't need to mater kilayim. It must be that there's some type of stitching going on, and therefore that's the raya. Okay. So Amar Rabba Barav Ada. Amar Rav Ada Amar Rav Im Nifsa Kachut Mi Karo Psula. So this is going back on what we said before. And here it says that if let's say you had some of the strings that snapped off, so if let's say the string snapped off from its base, then that already is going to be possible. It says Rashi, Hainu Roish HaMechuber L'Talos. The base part which is attached to the talis itself. So if one of those strings, which is before the first knot you make, if one of those strings snaps, that's pasul, which of course is the din, as we know, it's psul. So Yosef Rav Nachman v'kol Omer lo hashmaisa Eisvei Rabbi Rav Nachman. So he posed the kasha. When do we say that you have to have a certain amount of tzitzis? It has to be a certain amount that's supposed to be mishuleshes. So Oimrim b'tchilasai, only at the beginning, at the time when you make it. At the end, shirav v'gardumav kolshu. All you need is a small amount. So my shirav, my gardumav, what does that mean? My love, shirav the ifsik minayu. That let's say some of them snapped off. Yishtai minayu, there's a little bit left. And garmudin means the gardum igradumi, and basically that it's snapped off, and therefore That's the point. As Rashi says, Ulagamri Nifsuk, Sad Ha'ikr, right? So this is a kasha one who says in Nifsuk Hachut Mi Karoi that it's psula if the string snaps from the base, that it's puzzle. Then how else would we understand what this means? Which is mashma that it's not puzzle. So this is low. Chadikatani. One is being learned. Shiuri Gardumov Koshahu. That is a smallest amount, providing, as Rashi says, the nishar ksas, the nifsak ksas, that some of it was ripped off, but some of it remains. So v'lema Gardumov shirav lamuli. So hakamashma devi'inan shirul Gardumov. We need for this amount of these strings is kenil unvan, enough to be able to tie it. Yosef Rabbi v'karmer mishmei derav chut shel kerach oila min haminyan. So as we're going to see, the thread that is wrapped around the others to create the gedil, the braid, is counted among the 8 threads. As Rashi says, so that which is wrapped around, as we know, when you make the tzitzis, you have some long strings and you're wrapping it around. Some have admitted to double knot 7, double knot 8, double knot 11, double knot 13. We'll see the significance of those turnings, but says Rashi, Oiso shekarach saviv, the string that you wrap around, Ois menu hagadil, and you make it's like the braided section. Oilo mimenu shmoina chutin. So that actually counts as one of the 8 strings. The shmoina chutin be'inam, because you need to have 8 strings. We have 4 doubled over. So therefore, that string which is wrapping around the other ones counts as one of the 8 strings. Armali Rav Yosef Shmuel Amra V'loi Rav. It was actually Shmuel that said not Rav. Ibn Nami Yom Rabba Bar Chana Sachli Rabbi Yeshaya the Usha, that he said the following statement, that Chut Shel Kerach Oila Min Haminyan. And Yosef Rava, there's all these different gearses over here, V'ka'amr Mishmei Shmuel, he said in the name of Shmuel that the cheles, when it comes to the blue thread, shekarach ruba, that the majority of it's wrapped around, so ksher, says Rashi. What does that mean? That the majority of it's wrapped around? Well, what's the problem? So the way it's ideally supposed to be is it's supposed to be in thirds. You're supposed to have 1/3 of it should be braided, and then the last, after you got to the last double knot, there should be 2/3 hanging freely. But here's the opposite. It says Rashi, Shasa Shnei Shlish Gadil, you actually, what you did is you made 2/3 of it braided, and Vishlish Anaf. And the third is just the hanging, like almost like branches. Ksher, V'afagav the mitzvah Shlish Gadil, Shnei Shlish Anaf. It's supposed to be the other way around, right? It's supposed to really be 2/3 are hanging, not 1/3, but nonetheless, the point is that this is acceptable. Chel Shekar Chruba is Ksher. Okay. Amrli Rabbi Yosef, Rav Amr V'lo Shmuel. Rav said not Shmuel. So Itmar Nami Amar Rav Huna Bar Yehuda Marav Sheshas Amar Rav Yomi Marav Boy Marav Techela Shekar Chruba Ksher. As you said, that even if, let's say, the majority of it is braided and there's only 1/3 hanging, it's fine. Rav Chia Bered Rav Nasim Masni Hachi Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Sheshas Amar Rav Yomi Marav Boy Marav. So it's the name of Rav. Techela Shekar Chruba Ksher. Even if all you have is one link, it's kosher. So the chulia, as we said in yesterday's daf, is the space between the knots. So let's say you make a double knot and you wrap it, let's say 8 times, and another double knot. So that's the chulia, which is in between. So if all you have is just one link in between, that will be enough. Okay, and Rashi says el chulia achas hakafa gimel pa'amim. It has to be going around 3 times. Okay. V'noit cheles shlish gedil v'shnei shlish anaf. And the cheles should be 1/3, and 2/3 should be hanging. That's the ideal, as we said. V'kamashir chulia. What is the measurement of this the chulias, of this link in the braids in between the knots. So Tanya Rabbi Omer Kadesh Yichroich V'Yishalash. As we said, it should be long. That space in between the double knots should be big enough that you should be able to wrap it around once, twice, and 3 times. Even though there are different minhagim. So Tana Hapoiches L'Yivches Mesheva. Actually, it's better when it comes to the chulias, the link between between the knots. It's better that it should be 7. And it shouldn't be more than 13. So there's the 7 heavens. Not more than 13 keneged shiva rikim. The shisha avirim shebinaim, and the 6 air spaces between them. So if you can envision, there's knots, and in between the knots is the chulias. So too when we talk about 13 is because in between each of the heavens is space in between. So therefore it ends up equaling 13. And Rashi says, Shebein Shiva Rakiyim V'Yalshim Shatachelos Daimel Yam V'Yam Daimel Rakiya. So he said, and it's Gemara later on, that when you look at the Tchelos, or Yisem Oisam B'Zachartem As Kol Mitzvahs Hashem, is because by you looking at the Tchelos, you're reminded of the sea, and the sea of the sky, and the sky of the Kisei Kavod. So anyway, we can now understand the minig, at least the minig Ashkenaz, that we do 7, and the last one is 13. So it's not less than 7, but it's not more than 13, and there's different reasons why the in-betweens are 8 and 11. Tana Kashu Maschil Maskibul Lavan. So when you start, you should start with the white. Says Rashi, Sheminiach Shnei Chutin Aruchen, when you have these 2 long strings, Lasas Mehen Hagidil, in order to be able to wrap them around, Umaskil Lichroich, you want to begin wrapping, so Belavan. So you should start off doing the white, and then Gemara doesn't say this. Rashi says V'emsa Karech Shel Tcheles, the Chayzim Asayim Belavan. So then you can start using the blue strings to wrap around, but you should end with the white. Okay, now what is the reason for that? So Gemara says like this: Tana Kishu Maskil Belavan Hakanaf Min Kanaf. Because you should start off this way, because you want it to be a white thread, like the garment. Okay. However, and then you can switch to Tchelos. However, Kishu Masayim Belavan, end off also with a white. Mal Mekaydish Vol Meridin, because it was white, and therefore you should also do the same thing. And Rashi says Mishum Mal Mekaydish Hein Meridin Givan the Akta Makra B'Min Kanaf, and it says you should. The pasuk says you should use the min kanaf shema mina choshevu. Obviously, that demonstrates its chashivas. Hilkach imasayim betchelas. If you would end with the tchelas instead, havele moyrid seifat tzitzis mitchilasa. So it ends up like the end of the tzitzis goes down. So the starting is white, so you can't end off with blue. Okay. So why can you have any blue? Okay. Obviously, that's not the same issue of Mal B'Kodesh, but it's interesting idea. Okay. So Rabba Bar Chana Haviyasve, they're sitting together, and Havika Chalafi Osel who Gavra, there's a person who passed them by, the Machasi Galima the Kult Tachelta, and they noticed that this person, his entire talus, his entire garment was blue. Was tchelas, and not only that, but ramile tchelta, and also the tzitzis, the threads, also were tchelas. This guy was all blue; he was all in. So this was an interesting thing that they observed as we continue to Amud Beis. V'galima, v'gadila migadil, says Rashi. Kol tzitzis hoy gadil. So the other thing which was unusual is that the whole thing was braided and nothing was hanging. It was just completely all knots. So based on that, so he said that the garment is okay. That's not a problem. However, the tchelas, the actual strings, are a problem. And Rashi says, but enough because there's no hanging, right? The whole thing was completely tied up. Rabba Barachan Oimer Lo Galima V'i Galima V'Yeheta Chelta. So he actually says no, that they're both are befitting, even though the strings are completely tied up and there's nothing hanging. So Rabba Barachana Savar Ksiv, the pasuk on one hand says Gedil, Ksiv Pasil. So Oy Gedil, O Pasil. So it could be either one. That would be acceptable. Rav Savar Oylum Pasil Be'inan. Actually, it needs to have the pasil. So again, the question is, does it need those strings detached? We said, really, you do need it. But the whole purpose of the language of Gedilim is just coming to tell you the amount of threads that are required. Okay. Now, the Gemara says like this. Gedil Shnayim. When it says the word Gedil, the braids, it's 2. Gedilim is arba, so we add another 2. Asa Gedil upasaltayu betoichai. So you should make a Gedil and put it from within, which basically is what we do. We have 4 strings, and then we fold them inside the garment so that all of a sudden it becomes 8. Amar Shmuel Mishmei the Levi Chutit Semer Poitrin Mishel Pishton. If let's say you have the strings that are made out of wool, so that will pater a linen garment. And the reason is because the chelas needs to be made from wool, right? So the strings are good, and will pater a linen garment if they're together. Iboihu shel pishdan mahu shifta b'shel tsemer. How about the other way around? Let's say we're talking about a linen strings. Well, that pater a woolen garment. So, semer b'shel pishdan. Why do we say that if it's woolen strings in a linen garment, huda pater, kivanta techelas patra lavanami pater, because the techelas itself, the strings of blue need to be wool. So lavanami pater. So therefore, white will also pater. Avol pishtim, but semer lo. But maybe not when it comes to pishtim. Yeah, maybe not the other way around. This is actually going to be a question in a second. So tsemer b'shel pishtim huda pater dikvan the techelas pater lavan pater. So lavanami pater. Avol pishtim, but semer lo. Odilma kivan dechsiv usilba shatnes semer pishtin yachdav. It says you can't have wool and linen together, but then it also says Gedilim Tasalach, for your tzitzis we allow it. So Loshnat Semer Pishtin, Loshnat Pishtin with Semer. We don't make any distinction, either way should be acceptable. So Tashma, Diyam Rachba, Rabbi Yehuda, Chutit Semer, when it comes to the chutim, the strings of wool, Paitin B'Shel Pishtan, B'Shel Pishtan, Paitin B'Shel Semer. So you see, Taka, that it's okay. Chutit Semer Pishtin, let's say you have strings which are both, Paitin B'chol Maklim. It paters in all cases, Ve'afil B'Shirayin, even if, let's say, it's silk. He says that you don't need tzitzis at all. Okay. So let's slow down for a second, and let's look at question 6. Are you allowed to have a garment, tzitzis techelas, the tzitzis are blue, the lavan mitzemer pishtin. So is that allowed? So we didn't get to that yet. Okay, we'll understand that question. We'll read the question again when we get to it. Okay, so we said that when it comes to a silk garment, it's patim tzitzis. So Esri Rabbi Rav Nachman, Hashirayin, Vakrach, Vahasarikin, all these like silk garments, kulon chayavim b'tzitzis. So it says silk garments are chayav in tzitzis. Now it's only midrabanan. So Yihachim Seifa, the Kun Semru Pishtim Paturin Behen. It says that Semru and Pishtim will pater them. So Yamar Bishlam Deraisa, that silk is Muchlim Deraisa Hainu Dimishtaru Bahu Kilayim. That's why Kilayim isn't the problem. How could this be allowed? How would they allow you to do this mixture when it's only a chiyuv d'Rabbanan and you're violating this d'Oraisa? So ema ot semer o pishtin. You can't have both. Because you're right, since it's only d'Rabbanan, you can only have one. Hachinam mastabi tani seifa, what does it say? Hein b'minin. If it's the same, then paitrin, then it paters shalo b'minan ein paitrin. So it has, if it's the same material, that the wool and if it's a wool and the string, it's fine. Shalo b'minan ein paitrin. But let's say it's not the same material, so then it will not pater. So yamar b'shlam d'Rabbanan hainu mifter b'minan. That's the reason why we say it's pater. El yamar d'Oraisa tzemer pishtin hu de pater, right? So that's right. It has to be. You have to use wool and linen. The Torah says specifically that it's wool and linen. So no, that's not true. Area. The Rabbi. That's a contradiction in Psukim. Ksiv hakanaf min kanaf, right? Which basically means as long as the threads are the same material as the garment, even if it's not wool and not linen. The Ksiv yet it says. Semer pishtim, that's dafka, either wool or linen. So how ketzad? So how do we understand this? So this is the Yisayid. We have this in numerous places. The Shabbos. Semer pishtim, paitrin ben shelo b'minan. When it comes to wool and linen, those strings will pater any garment. They don't have to be the same material. However, sharminin, if let's say you have the strings of different material, then b'minan paitrin, only if the beged is the exact same as the strings. Shel b'minan ein paitrin, but if not, then it's not going to work. Okay. Rav Nachman kedatana Rabbi Shmuel. The Tana Rabbi Shmuel hoyel v'nemer begadim b'Torah. Since it says begadim in the Torah stam, it says al kanfei v'gnehem. So it mentions on the corners of your garments. U'pralocha kasav echet mehen semer pishtin. So, but yet the Torah then is specific regarding kilayim and also regarding negoyim. Rashi says saras. It says bebeged semer o bebeged pishtim. So av koil semer pishtim. Fine. So there's some people that say taka has to be beged pishtim. So the high tana de Rabbi Shmuel mafkim idif tana Rabbi Shmuel. What is that? The tana Rabbi Shmuel beged. It says that there's a din on the beged. So anyway, a beged semer menayin. How do we know also wool? Rabbi. So Rabbi semer. Anyway, ela beged semer. So menayin lo Rabbi semer gemolim v'semer are navim v'noitza shalizim, the hairs of goats, v'klach v'sirikin v'hashirayim menayin. How do we know when it comes to these things that they're also matamah b'negoyim? Talmud lomer o beged. Says Rashi, beged semer o beged pishtim. So, okay, so that's the end of that. So let's look at question 6. Heim esher lasos beged meshit tzitzes, v'chelos v'lovim et semer pishtin u'mastadim. So we said like this. If you say the chiyuv of the beged of this silk is deraisa, the inkim shari kilayim b'tzitzes. That's why we'll allow you to have wool and linen in the tzitzis itself, if it's a din deraisa, so it overrides that. Even Rabbanan lo shari kilayim b'tzitzis, right? So they wouldn't allow it. So therefore, that's why we said it must be a raya that it's actually a din deraisa because it was din Rabbanan. Let's read this again. Bishlam and Rabbanan hainu depitru b'minan, right? El iyam deraisa semer pishtin hu de pater. Okay, that's actually not what I was looking for. I was looking for up here. V'kul and semer pishtin pater mehen. So iyam red bishlam and deraisa hainu de mishabu kilayim, right? El iyam derabanan heichem mishalei kilayim. So that's the answer for number 6. Okay. So, if you said it's a din deraisa, so then that will matter it, even though it's kalayim, but it's only the rabbanon, losher kalayim, which is a din deraisa, right? A chiyuv derabanan is not going to allow you to override a chiyuv deraisa. Okay, all right, we're going to stop there. Let's see another question. TA 18. El begadim chayavim min atayr betzitzes. So it's definitely wool and linen. Sarah Pishnin me'ezim min oisa chuti hatzitzes. Now let's look at question 18. So bebeged pluta irak beged hasui metzemra pishtin or kol habegadim. Right, so it's takas a machlokas. V'chuti hatzitzes, but the strings oy metzemra o pishtin. O min habeged, right? So that's the key over here. So as long as the strings can be wool or linen, or it could be a different material, but that material has to match the strings, the threads then have to match the same as the garment. Okay, so that's the explanation. Let's see what I wrote for question TB 21. Samer pishtin ima beged. Okay. It says, Im habeged min hamin chutz metzemer pishtin hachutin sarach liyois ma'oiso hamin. Okay, that's very good, right? Then that's true. The metzemer pishtin oz afilu shloi b'minan. So this is what Rabbi said, that if you have a different material, a different threads, other than wool and linen, then the garment has to match that. But if it's wool and linen threads, then the garment does not have to match it. And so machlokas again, whether or not the garment itself has to be wool or linen, or even other material. Adkan.